President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higherside Chats.
How's it going, Higherside Chatters? Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke from San Diego. I'm Greg Carlwood, and we've been around the block enough times to know there's a vast control network of manipulative and abusive powers steering our societal ship through the rough waters of reality, but like an iceberg floating in the sea, we only get a glimpse of the gears and levers that power this nefarious New World Order network, while the bulk of the beast remains hidden, quite literally, beneath the surface. Well, lucky for us, today's guest has spent over 20 years researching these things beneath the surface in an ongoing pursuit to expose secret underground and underwater bases, research facilities, and tunnels, and the broad range of activities that the conspiracy world suspects may be going on in the depths of these dark places. His name is Dr. Richard Sauder, and he is a predominant author in several alternative fields and has written books entitled Underground Bases and Tunnels, Kundalini Tales, Underwater and Underground Bases, and most recently, Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. It's going to get weird, people, and I couldn't be more pumped to get down to it. Richard, my man, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. This is an area of wild speculation and information embargoes, and I'm really looking forward to going through some of this stuff with you. It only makes sense that the ultra-powerful organizations that run our reality would create underground installations because it offers the most security and secrecy, two things we know they hold very dear. And I know you've been talking about this stuff for a long time, but give us a little overview of the information you've gathered over the years. How would you brief the people on Underground Bases 101?
Well, first of all, I would say that, the title of my last book on this topic is a big giveaway. It's a huge clue. Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files. It's all right in front of us. The money to make these facilities is being stolen from us daily in a variety of different ways. It's being sucked out of the economy, out of government coffers, out of banking coffers, out of business. Literally in stealthy ways, it's being sucked out of people's bank accounts, wallets, and purses by the trillions, the multi-trillions of dollars. This is an ongoing theft. It's a scam of epic proportions. There's never been anything like this in history. That's the funding side of it. It's been going on for years, decades, actually. And then on the other side of it, the engineering to do all of this is like science fiction. It's like something from another realm, another world. Mm-hmm. And yet we have these facilities all over the place, military, non-military, and they can be extremely deep, thousands of feet deep, even 1 or 2 miles or more underground, and also undersea. It's technologically feasible to make tunnels and large facilities undersea, actually down in the bedrock beneath the seafloor. So the thing that people need to wrap their minds around is that while I do believe aliens and extraterrestrials exist, and there's a ton of evidence that indicates they're coming here, they are here, and they're active here and have been for a long time. You don't need extraterrestrial engineering or expertise per se to build these huge, deep, sophisticated underground and or underwater facilities. Terrestrial humanity and the large engineering companies and corporations, the huge civil engineering and marine engineering firms, and also the large government agencies with technical expertise have everything they need to make these facilities. And indeed, they are doing it and have been doing it for a long time. And it is a different reality altogether. There certainly are thousands of people involved in making, constructing, maintaining, and operating these facilities. But because of the types of programs and projects that are carried out underground and undersea in great secrecy. These people have very stringent oaths, security oaths that they enter into, that they sign. And so very few of them say anything, and it's a wonder that, to me, that anyone has spoken. And during the course of my research, I've spoken with a whole wide range gamut of individuals, from the proverbial man and woman in the street right up to people right up reasonably highly placed in the alphabet soup mix of military-industrial espionage agencies.
So, are there any interesting or shocking details that you've uncovered about the actual construction of these bases? Because I've heard that some of them are burrowed out by large building-sized drills or connected underground by maglev tube train systems.
Well, the machinery for underground excavation and construction can be extremely large and powerful. The tunnel boring machines themselves are mostly electrically powered. And in the literature, the largest diameter of the cutting face of a tunnel boring machine, so-called TBMs, was about 55, 56 feet in diameter. And that's huge.
Yeah.
So you can imagine a machine that has a cutting face with a diameter of 55, 56 feet, the kind of horsepower, the sheer raw power and energy that it would take for that to grind its way through solid rock hundreds or thousands of feet beneath the surface. So and then the trailing apparatus behind that to carry away the rock debris that's ground away as these machines chew their way through solid rock, and all of that can extend hundreds of feet behind the actual cutting face of the machine. So you're talking about a machine that's like a huge, gargantuan, extremely powerful earthworm, basically, but it bores its way through solid rock. That's the basic tunnel boring machine, and there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of them being used all over the world. You could actually, if you have $500,000 extra dollars laying around, you could probably buy a used serviceable tunnel boring machine off the internet.
Yeah, that is super interesting, man. Are these bases connected in any way underground, as far as you've seen, like with that type of maglev technology or any type of rocket train tube technology?
Well, let me tell you, Greg, there are many stories about that, anecdotal stories that you will hear. And if you do a keyword search on the internet, you can probably come up with some of these stories about high-speed maglev trains and alien bases and connecting American military bases all over North America. What I can tell you from my research is that there was a concerted period of research in high-speed underground vacuum tube tunnel transport. By vacuum tube, I mean tunnels, long tunnels, hundreds, even thousands of miles long, from which the air has been evacuated, essentially making an extremely long, extremely large vacuum tube. Now, why would you do that? Well, it's so that when you send a high-speed train through the vacuum tube, there's no air resistance, and it can go much faster using less energy. So once you built a tunnel and it's airtight, and you suck all the air out of it, you could send, of course, a sealed train through there, sealed so the passengers won't asphyxiate in a vacuum. But a sealed train you could send through at very high speed with no air friction whatsoever. Now, what pops up again and again in the literature, and I discuss all this in my book, is the maglev technology, the idea that you would levitate the train cars, which would be spherical, on a magnetic field. And the magnetic field would be generated by electromagnetic coils that would be embedded in the floor of the tunnel. And you would have miles and miles of these electromagnetic coils as as many miles as the tunnel is long, and they would create a magnetic field, and then the train would float on this magnetic field, a couple of inches, 3 inches, whatever, above the floor of the tunnel. And then once you've started to pulse the magnetic field, these coils, these electromagnetic coils buried in the floor of the tunnel, once you pulse the current through them, it would create a sort of magnetic wave, analogous to a wave on the sea, like surfers riding a cresting wave on the sea. Only in this case, you would have a train in a deep underground tunnel riding on a magnetic wave that would pulse down the length of this tunnel. And the train would ride that. You would pulse it as fast as you wanted the train to go. Now, is that clear? Do you understand what I'm telling you there?
Absolutely. I've seen some futurists talk about it, but the idea that it's in existence now, that's pretty wild.
Well, let's go back to the 1930s, to the Third Reich, because that's where it all started with a German engineer named Hermann Kemper, who came up with this idea of the Rohrbahn, which is exactly what I just described to you. Only he was prepared to do it with 1930s technology. And he published actually got a patent, a Reich's patent for it, and which I mention in my book, and I also have some diagrams of his proposed underground high-speed maglev train tunnel network in Europe, connecting the major capitals of Europe, Kaliningrad, which is now in Russia, I believe, Vienna, Paris, Bonn, Berlin, Hamburg, Zurich. It would go all over Europe. That was his plan. And using 1930s technology, he was planning for a train that would go 600 miles per hour underground.
Wow.
Which is a speed which is faster than most commercial airliners travel today. So you understand that's like 80 years ago, and 70 years ago he was planning for that and writing about it, openly discussing it. Well, of course, World War II put an end to those plans, as far as I know, or did they? And who would know? Because at the end of World War II, so much about what happened in Germany in the 30s and 40s was classified, and a lot of it is classified to this day. So if he ever built anything like that, it was kept deep, top secret from that day until now.
Right.
The fact that starting in about the early to mid 60s and running up at least through the early 70s, but petering out by the late 70s, there was a lot of publicly published literature in the engineering, scientific, and military and government literature about building a very high-speed tube transport system in the United States, city to city, intercity. Military agencies were involved, civil engineering companies were involved, non-military government agencies were involved, think tanks were involved. It was a very high-level, serious scientific and engineering research effort. There was a lot of time and money put into this. And then, Greg, it all went away. Except that just a few years, I would say 5-6 years after, the literature trail ran cold. It just all withered and died away. And that was when, by the late 80s, you started hearing rumors about a secret underground, very high-speed tunnel system.
Isn't that funny? Definitely a correlation there.
Yes, that's what I think. So my guess is all of the noise died down to a whisper, an inaudible whisper, and they meaning the power structure, the big engineering companies, the military agencies, some of the other government agencies, and of course there would have been banks and financial institutions involved in this, because carrying out a huge engineering project like that costs many billions of dollars.
That is true. Hey, let me switch gears on you a little bit here. I want to talk about, we talked about these tunnels. We talked about the finances that have been funneled into the black budgets. I wanted to ask you about maybe what these tunnels can be connecting, because we hear so much about these bases. And as a show that handles a lot of fringe topics, there's very few threads that make my mouth water, like the stories of these stranger aspects that are going on in these underground bases. I'm very curious. I've also heard some rumors that go into the territory of saying there's full underground cities.
Well, let me tell you, my research shows unambiguously that the larger of these facilities can accommodate thousands of people. So yeah, they are. One publicly known example would be Mount Weather, the big FEMA underground base beneath Mount Weather in Northern Virginia. This is outside of Washington, D.C. When you start to get into the Appalachian Mountains. It's in the front range of the Appalachians, and that's actually was started back in the 1950s and is still a major, very large operational base for the United States federal government, and it can accommodate thousands of people. So indeed, and it's way down there. It's the top levels of that base are like 500 or 600 feet underground, and then of course it goes down deeper than that. So these bases can be very deep, very large, and they can accommodate not just scores, not just hundreds of people, but thousands of people living and working in them. So people need to expand their mental horizons. And when I say, that it's a different reality, it's like a parallel world, out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
I'm telling the literal truth. And when I say there are unknown thousands of people involved in building, maintaining, and operating, working in these facilities, I'm not exaggerating. That's by thousands. I mean many, many thousands.
Wow, this is almost like a breakaway civilization.
It is, and people like Richard Dolan and Joseph Farrell and Catherine Austin Fitts have been talking about that, and I've been talking about that really myself for the last 20 years, without having ever specifically used that word. But it's like a parallel reality. And how can it be that you have so many thousands and thousands and thousands of people involved in constructing, maintaining, operating, and living and working in these facilities, and virtually none of them talk down to a man and a woman? Well, it tells you that what is going on is really highly secret, that it's very important for the people who are engaged in it, and that the penalties for talking must be extremely severe,
right?
Such that virtually no one does, and or if they do, they are shut up.
Man, so of course they're trying to keep these things a secret. Have you ever been able to see beyond the veil to get any indication of what type of activities are going on? Because that's a lot of effort and energy to keep, obviously, some type of experimentation or something a secret.
Well, let me tell you. Sure, and not all of these bases are secret. Some of them are, and my research indicates clearly that there are secret underground installations. That's an incontrovertible fact. How many? I don't know. Where are they? I don't know, because they're secret, you see. That's very difficult to say.
Right.
Where are they and what's done in them? There again, you can't really say unless you're on the inside of those compartmentalized programs. And if you're on the inside, then you're in and you're not out. So you can't talk. And if you do, I guess there are enforcers who fix the situation so that you either don't talk again or you just don't breathe again. Like I said earlier, there's an entire parallel track of reality on this planet. And what's going on? Who's involved? All we can say is not much more than what I'm saying. We got trillions of dollars disappearing, just being sucked out of the global economy, the economy of the United States, but beyond that, of the entire planet.
Right.
Trillions, Greg, trillions being sucked off into top secret programs, my research strongly indicates that part of that is the underground and undersea bases and tunnels.
Yeah, interesting. Richard, time is flying by, and there's so much I really want to ask you about. In particular, I know that people want to hear about some of the weirder aspects of these bases. I mean, we've had a lot of guests that talk about like the base in Dulce, New Mexico, and all
That's
kinds.
propaganda. Dulce, in my estimation, is propaganda, disinformation.
Interesting, because the main rumor there is ET involvement. I was wondering if you've heard any stories of ET involvement at these underground bases that you think are credible.
Well, I don't think the Dulce-based stories are credible in that I don't think there is a base, as the rumors and stories and legends describe, at or very near the small town of Dulce, New Mexico, which is just south of the border with Colorado. Are there secret underground bases? Yes. Are there aliens underground? I believe there are. Are there joint alien, top secret American military programs or projects underground? I think the anecdotal evidence strongly points in that direction, yes. Is the Dulce story as told true? I think it's highly probable disinformation.
If Dulce you think is misinformation, that's totally possible. What are some of the anecdotal stories that you do think have some credibility to them?
Well, I think I discuss a few of them in my book in the last chapter. There's, for instance, a base that has been described undersea off the coast of Puerto Rico, an underwater base, alien base. I'm inclined to give that a greater hearing because there has been a lot of reported UFO activity in the Caribbean area, including in Puerto Rico and in the waters, the seas around Puerto Rico. Also, for years, the United States Navy had a station at Roosevelt Roads in eastern Puerto Rico. That region was a very high. There was a very high level of American U.S. Navy activity for a period of most of the post World War II period until about 10 years ago. And I think there's a reason for that. Another place where I think there's a high possibility of underground alien activity would be off the coast of California. Linda Moulton Howe describes in one of her books, which I cite in my book, an anecdote from one of her informants of being taken to such an undersea base which, by the way, very much resembled the entrance to which very much resembled the entrance technology of the rock site base technology that I discuss in my book, leading me to wonder if maybe it's not an American Navy undersea facility that's off the coast of California in the Channel Islands region that has an alien presence. These types of stories. So those are two examples right there that I would lend some credence to. And then the Southwest region in general. There are a lot of videos and there's a lot of noise on the internet about the United States military having shot down and or recovered crashed UFOs, in some cases with their occupants dead, and other cases with live occupants. Of course, Roswell figures very large in this scenario, but not only Roswell. And in my estimation, Los Alamos itself would be the site where one or more of these aliens would have been kept quarantined.
Interesting. And obviously there is going to be a lot of disinformation around such a high priority topic. And
let me tell you something else, Greg. There are a lot of disinfo agents within the field of ufology.
Yes.
And this has been going all the way back to the 1940s, especially starting in the 50s and 60s. There were a lot of people involved in ufology with connections to the United States military and espionage agencies. There still are. And also in the field of remote viewing. Many of the prominent names in remote viewing, the field of remote viewing, either were in the past direct employees of military or espionage agencies, or have close ties with people who were.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the reality. Once you get in to these areas that the powers that be prefer, that the people know little or nothing about, you start running into individuals with connections, both formal and informal, to intelligence, espionage, and military agencies. That is the reality.
Yeah, it definitely is. But so let's get to some truth, or maybe more just your belief structure. But you said that you believe that there probably are some ET bases like you described. What would you assess as the ET landscape in regards to working with people?
Another anecdote I give from my book is as I mentioned, a first-person account of an individual who was abducted, and of course that there are more and more abductees every decade. There appears to be a lot of this going on, apparently with the connivance of shadowy elements of the United States government and military. But this particular man was taken to an underground facility, and an intrusive medical examination was performed on him. He was in something that resembled a medical school amphitheater, and he was being worked on by aliens, but he also saw perfectly normal appearing terrestrial humans with them. So it was a joint alien-human operation.
That's interesting.
And yes, well, I mentioned this in my book, and he asked, because he was, of course, traumatized and surprised and puzzled, all of that and more. And so he, as this was going on, asked, where am I? And he was told, you are in an underground base in southeast Kansas. And as he was told that, he got a telepathic vision of being in a deep underground base in southeast Kansas, beneath the Kansas landscape. And then he said, well, why? And he was told, well, an important procedure is being performed on you that could be for the benefit of you and other people. So he was their lab rat, in other words. And the thing that impressed him was, number one, the facility, and what was happening to him clearly was astonishing. And then beyond that, the fact that, hey, there's aliens and they're working on me, but you know what? There are people here too with them. So I have some of those stories in my book, and I accept that this is going on. I accept that this is part of the underground and underwater basis scenario. There's just a real bizarre aspect of it. I also was contacted by an engineer who's spent his career working in these facilities, the really secret ones. And he actually, frankly, confessed to me that he had amnesiac blocks in his memory. There were things he couldn't remember that had been, just weren't there. Missing episodes and periods. And this is another thing that pops up is the mind control aspect of this alternate reality. We are so deep into this simulated, artificial, virtual reality, man. This whole planet is rigged and controlled. Yep. We're like in a high-budget Hollywood sci-fi production. It's like the whole planet is that way. Mm-hmm. But what he told me was that, and he told me, like in California, Colorado, Nevada, different places, there are these very deep, very large, extremely sophisticated, technologically cutting-edge manufacturing facilities that the military-industrial complex has established, such that if civilization, so-called civilization, is destroyed, they have the capability of using what's underground to make whole cloth from beginning to end, a functional automobile, a functional jet airplane, or a train locomotive, or a microwave oven, or a television, a tabletop radio, a cell telephone, you follow me, to reconstruct to reconstruct industrial technological civilization, start from zero and start it all over again without having to have a 5,000 year cycle of development, starting with, well, we'll rub these two sticks together and make a fire. They don't want to go back to that point. So if they blow up the entire world with nuclear war, or there's a pole shift or asteroids, whatever, that one or more of these bases will survive and that they will jumpstart technological industrial civilization, like basically from a mid 20th century, late 20th century start. So it's like, no sweat to them. They'll knock it all down, destroy it all, and start it all over again on their terms. And the other thing he described to me was, and I've never seen this in the open literature anyway, and some of these bases, as he described to me, have entrance tunnels that may be 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away from where the base itself is.
Interesting. Now, another area I wanted to ask you about.
There's another yes, one more thing he told me, and this gets into the question of cyborgs, which has been discussed a lot in science fiction literature and science fiction films, and more we see discussion in the open literature of marrying DNA to electronic circuits or wiring computers right into human brains.
Right.
Now, he has memories of working with in vats with what to him resembled large, like slabs of animal protoplasm, like a side of beef in a vat. But on the side of the beef would be a keyboard, but it was like a futuristic sci-fi kind of keyboard in which his hands and his fingers would exactly fit. And he was either programming the side of beef or in some kind of connection with the side of beef doing, and this is where his memory blanks out. He can only remember doing it more than once. This was work he did, and he's an engineer, but he can't remember more than that.
Oh, man, that is weird. I wonder if that has anything to do with the stories you hear of cloning or human-animal hybridization going on.
Far more than that. My guess would be, and I ran across this in some of my research back at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. This was already back in the 1990s. They were doing research where they would attach gold electrodes to DNA molecules, and the idea was to have an electronic contact between the DNA. In other words, they needed to have an electronic contact between the DNA and a computer, a supercomputer mainframe, so that you could either decode or read what was in the DNA or program the DNA.
Wow.
So my guess is they're well beyond that, probably creating their own DNA and programming it to do God knows what. And that could be done on a nano level, a microscopic level.
That's scary stuff, man. Have you heard any of those stories, or do you put any stock in the stories of human-animal hybridization at these underground facilities?
Yes, I do.
What can you tell us about that? That sounds super interesting.
Well, what I can tell you is what I know from the open literature, that research in human-animal hybridization has been, and not only that, but transgenic hybrid biological engineering has been going on at least since the 1990s. And my guess is extending all the way back to the World War II period. I think the Japanese and the Nazis were involved in this, and probably the Americans too, at least since the 1930s and 1940s. In other words, I think the announcement by Watson and Crick of their discovery of the DNA molecule was probably, in a sense, disinformation too, and that the public announcement of it probably greatly lagged behind what was being done secretly by a period of years or decades.
Yeah.
And it's also true that the Department of Energy of the United States is the lead agency on this planet for research into the human genome, human DNA. Now, you would think it would be the Department of Health or I don't know, some major biological research institute. No, it's the Department of Energy. I'll tell you their public rationale for doing that. The public rationale is after World War II and the explosion of the first few atomic bombs, it was realized that radiation has a detrimental effect on DNA, on genetic material. So they needed to research that, and that's why they're so heavily involved in researching human DNA. That's the cover story, and there's some truth to that, no doubt about it. I believe the deeper reason is that essentially the most powerful energy in the universe is information. Mm-hmm. Energy at its essence is information. And when you're dealing with, for example, supercomputing, which the Department of Energy is massively involved in as well, you're doing nothing but transfer of information. It's the transfer of information that precedes the employ or release of energy in all cases. Mm-hmm. And early on, I think they realized when they began doing DNA research, the hyperdimensional quality of the DNA molecule. And when you're talking about the engineering of hyperdimensional realities or merely accessing hyperdimensional realities, you were talking about the release or access to stupendous energies of all kinds,
right?
Imaginable and unimaginable. So you see, the DNA molecule is a hyperdimensional molecule. The Department of Energy is the lead agency on this planet into cutting-edge research into not only human DNA, but DNA in general. And so what I'm telling you is, when you get into the realm of working with and through DNA, you open the doors to the magical kingdom within, to universal, whatever, knowledge, power, information. There's just no end. That's what I'm telling you is just like a Alice in Wonderland reality that we're dealing with here. And it's not, and for that reason, this keeps popping up again and again in the underground basis, this biological engineering, genetic engineering, cloning, hybridization of humans and animals, and beings in vats full of amniotic fluid being cloned, and you run into this again and again and again. I have just read and heard these stories again and again. I believe that at least some of them certainly must be true.
Man, that is fascinating. There is another area that I wanted to ask you about. There's a lot of speculation about wild things going on in secret chambers under the pyramids of Giza and the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Are you able to shed any light on what might be going on under the surface there?
First of all, what you see in Egypt today are the highly, highly eroded and ruined remnants of a majestic civilization that existed there thousands of years ago. Pharaonic Egypt, in other words, dynastic Egypt, that for mainstream historians and Egyptologists begins about 4,500 years ago, or at the most 5,000 years ago, is just a remnant, as magnificent as that was.
Right.
Just a remnant of what went before, according to my research and my understanding. Because there was, before this dynastic Egypt that we know from our history books, another even more magnificent civilization. How far back that goes, I don't know. Having been there twice, my feeling is it goes back at least 10 or 15,000 years, and maybe 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years. When I first went, and I stood there and I looked at the Great Pyramid, just looking at it, immediately I knew everything I've been told in the history that I learned in school and that I've read about from mainstream Egyptology. Whatever the truth is, they're not telling it. Because once I just had a body knowing that no way, whatever they say happened, it's not that way. It's far older, and however they say it was done, it wasn't done that way. And beyond that, it's true. There's quite a lot underground. When I studied Arabic for a year, beginning Arabic, when I was doing my PhD. And my instructor was a Egyptian military intelligence officer. So I asked him about the pyramids. At that time, I hadn't been to Egypt. And I asked him about the pyramids. I said, is it true that there's something underneath them? And he said, yes. And I said, well, what? And he said, well, there's just multiple levels, miles of tunnels and chambers under the Giza Plateau. And this is my first time hearing that, and it kind of rocked me back on my heels. And I said, well, really, has anyone explored it? And he said, sure. And I said, well, who? I said, well, he said the Egyptian army has been all through there, sent their reconnoitering teams all through there, and then locked it all off and blocked it all off with armed guards. And so I've subsequently learned and read and spoken with other people, and indeed that's true. There's quite a lot beneath the Giza Plateau. What you see topside is part of it, but there's more beneath. Well, why doesn't mainstream Egyptology say much of anything, if anything, about what's beneath? It's because there's a cover-up, Greg. It's a thousands of years long cover-up about not only Egypt and Giza and not only what's below the ground, but what's inside in detail, other chambers in the major pyramids. This whole planet is involved in a cover-up. This whole planet is a black operation. There's just disinformation everywhere.
Yes.
So everywhere, up, down, and sideways. And we don't even know the planet that we're living on. People think, well, I live on Earth. I pretty well understand what's happening here. No, you don't. You don't know 1%. You don't know 1% of what's happening here. And yet we all, I don't say we all because I don't anymore, but I would say the vast majority of people walk about just automatically assuming that they know what's happening, and they don't. So anyway, the stories about things underground in Egypt, oh, hell yes. I mean, there's an awful lot underground in Egypt.
What do you think they're trying to hide?
Previous technological civilization, man.
Yeah. Are there any details you can give us about what they might have found down there?
Well, what I've been told on the QT is that, what you can read, and you can even find some of this on the internet, is that the Arab historians, which are very little listened to or studied in the Western world, Indian historians aren't either, I mean from India, but the Arab historians, and even more so the Indian historians, have quite a lot to say about the previous cycle of civilization or civilizations, which were very advanced. In the case of Egypt, one of the stories that the Arab chroniclers have left us down through the centuries is that there was a huge global cataclysm approaching. And of course, people who study this now realize that there have been a repeated series of global cataclysms over a very long period of time. Mm-hmm. But evidently, this is the most recent one, or one of the most recent ones. There was a king named King Sauder, and this was many thousands of years ago. He learned through his seers that there was a huge cataclysm that was going to just pummel the earth in the relatively near future, in a period of years. And it was going to be absolutely globally devastating. If I had a guess, it would be the destruction of Marduk that they probably observed, and there was a lag time before all that debris from Marduk being the planet that used to exist between Mars and Jupiter, and exploded thousands of years ago, evidently in interplanetary warfare. People can read the books of Joseph Farrell, or go online and read The Ages of Uras, U-R-A-S, Anton Parks, A-N-T-O-N, last name P-A-R-K-S. People can Google his name. He has some information about that. Joseph Farrell has written about some of these things, and others. But my guess is that there was this interplanetary warfare, and with the destruction of Marduk, they knew all of these debris from this exploded planet would come down the gravity well from half a solar system away and blast the Earth. And so he gave orders to have the Great Pyramid constructed as a repository of all of the wisdom and knowledge of the world at that time. And it was done. His name was King Saurid, Saurid. And this was done. And the Arab chroniclers have kept this story down through many centuries. The Western historians, I never heard it mentioned until I did my own independent research. But if you go and you actually read the dynastic succession, the kings before the deluge, some of them had fantastic lifespans and reigns, thousands of years. Then there was the deluge, and everything changed. Afterwards, people became more normal, like we know them today. Now, it's interesting that on the Great Pyramid itself, when in the medieval period, when the Arabs finally broke in by brute force, clearly there are secret entrances to the Great Pyramid from underground, for example. But when the Arabs broke in from above ground with brute force, they found in the passageways inside the Great Pyramid, like 150, 200 feet up, thick encrusted salt, which would be consistent with the sea having covered that area at one point in the past. And then as the sea subsided, there would have been a lot of evaporated salt left behind that was in the seawater. And there's other evidence in Egypt of, for example, the oasis of Fayum, which is now out in the desert southwest of Cairo, of Giza. It's a good 2 or 3 hour drive. There's an oasis out there, but it is a landlocked arm of the sea. In the past, the Mediterranean Sea extended down there, and it doesn't today. You see, it's all over the thousands of years dried up. So in the past, thousands of years ago, the geography of that region was far different, looked far different, different vegetation, different landscape, the waterways, everything was just 180 degrees different than it is today. Now it's just sand and desert from horizon to horizon. Was not that way 10,000, 11,000 years ago.
Interesting. That also brings to mind another non-mainstream story from the ancient past that you've talked about, which is the Hopi. Don't they have a pretty interesting story about visiting beings from a tunnel system on the Earth in the past?
Yes, the Hopi, in the last, when the Great Deluge happened, when there was the last great planetary catastrophe, the Hopi say that they went and lived underground in the southwest United States with the ant people for a period of time until conditions on the surface were once again conducive to human life. And they came back out onto the surface through like a cave opening or a hole in the ground and now live again on the surface after having spent a period of time underground, mind you, with the ant people. And to this day, the Hopi, if you talk to them, not what you read in books, but if you actually go and live in the Southwest, as I did for many years, I lived out there for 8 years, including in the region near, I studied at the university in Flagstaff and lived outside of Flagstaff. And I knew some Hopis and talked a little bit with them about the previous centuries and thousands of years. The Hopi went walkabout as a people, and they literally walked thousands of miles from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, is my understanding, and all points in between. This was their task given to them by the Creator because they are caretakers of the earth. So they literally had to physically walk their garden that they're taking care of, so to speak. And then they came back to the southwest region. And one of their stories, and as they came back to the southwest, some of the different pueblos that you see in the southwest, at Mesa Verde, for example, in Arizona, at Walnut Canyon, different Chaco Canyon, different places in New Mexico, different places where you have these ancient pueblo dwellings. Their oral history, their private oral history, is that they would go and live at these places for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and then they would be told to move, and they would go to another place and live there 50 years, 100 years, and then they would move around like that until they finally settled at the Three Mesa area where they are now. Their last stop before the Three Mesa area was at Wupatki, which is in between Flagstaff and the Three Mesas in northwestern Arizona. At Wupatki, there is a ball court which is of the style, in Mesoamerica, from Central America up into the southwestern United States, centuries ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. There was a ball game that they played where the male players used a kind of heavy rubber or leather ball, and they booted it with their hips through hoops that were at the ends or sides of the ball court. This game is not played anymore, and that is the most northern known ball court in the Mesoamerican ball playing region there at Wupatki. And right beside the ball court, there is a hole in the ground where the wind is always blowing in or out. It's an entrance to a vast underground cave system right there.
Wow.
I've gone many times. It depends on the air pressure. When there's low air pressure, the air blows out from underground. When there's high air pressure, the air blows into underground. And I mean days on end. And the story of the Hopi is that there's an underground area there where they lived. And when they came out in a hole on or near the side of the Grand Canyon. And that's the story. I believe it's true as told.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm always fascinated by those old stories of intelligent species that might not even be human, that are from within the earth. There's a lot of
Yes.
old cultures that talk about that. It's a really interesting thread.
Well, I don't think that the so-called terrestrial human race is the only technologically capable or so-called intelligent species on the Earth. There are a lot of stories about large intelligent insect beings, large intelligent reptilian beings, and you even run into some stories about other intelligences, as in was it Ionis, who was the fish man who came up out of the Persian Gulf and brought civilization to the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians thousands of years ago. And of course, there are stories of these aquatic humans. There are many stories about the mer people, mer meaning sea, the sea people who live underwater. There are many stories from many cultures around the world of mer people, human beings who live underwater, or human-like beings who live underwater, and also, surprisingly enough, there are even some modern-day sightings from time to time of mer people. So I don't rule out at all that there could be one or more aquatic species of humans or human-like beings.
Yeah, I am really curious if there's any ongoing communication with these species, maybe in secret, because it just seems like a wealth of potential.
I think so. I think at the least probably the Russians and the Americans have communication with them, but you have to understand that this regime in Washington, D.C. right now is so evil, and it's got its tentacles everywhere. Of course, it has allies in Wall Street, the city of London, Tel Aviv, Herzliya, different places. It's an evil neocon Zionist bankster cabal that they're taking. Frankly, Greg, they are taking this planet down. They have a pronounced self-destructive, self-destructive impulse, and they're leading us. We already have Fukushima and Chernobyl. Now they've taken us to the brink of a shooting nuclear war with the Russians. And, I mean, how much worse can it get before it's over?
Right. That's the million-dollar question.
Because the direction we're headed right now is an extremely dark, negative, destructive, evil direction. I mean, we could name deforestation. The great forests in Asia and Africa and Latin America are being cut down, the great tropical forest. The seas are being poisoned. We have exploded, melted down nuclear power plants. We have a global financial system based on the United States dollar that is self-destructing. We have a NATO Pentagon military machine that seems to be doing its best to egg the Russians into a shooting nuclear war. I mean, how far can this go before it just self-implodes?
Right. It's
self-destructs.
There's constantly people talking about, the collapse is coming, and we seem to be getting closer and closer.
But Greg, it's not coming. It's here.
Yeah.
It's collapsing now. I'm telling you that because of Fukushima, the Pacific Ocean is dying now. Because of the insane financial policies of the United States Federal Reserve Bank, the global economic order is collapsing now, and it's causing tremendous hardship. Half of humanity lives on $2 or $3 a day. Half of the human beings on this planet live on $2 or $3 a day. Now, you tell me how that doesn't represent global financial collapse. We're talking desperate suffering now by half of the human race, and the other half are looking over their shoulder, wondering, is that going to be me tomorrow or next week or next month? And the answer is maybe. The way things are going, could be.
Things are definitely bad. And I mean, based on these old stories of other species interacting with humanity, I mean, this seems like the prime time, because they generally come around near a giant global collapse, when they try to pick us back up off our destructive tendencies.
All I can tell you is that the so-called, with a heavy emphasis on so-called, ruling elite on this planet, they are psychopaths, they are demons in human form, they are incompetent, they're ignorant, and also extremely arrogant and violent. It's the worst of all possible combinations. Enormously ignorant, enormously arrogant, enormously violent, and incompetent beyond words to describe. It's just a tremendously dangerous combination. And that's our situation.
I totally agree with you there. And I know we've run a little long. I wanted to ask you about one other thing,
Yes.
something you had written about on your blog. You had mentioned that you had been shown a timeline of ET disclosure that runs all the way up to like 2070, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I can tell you. I was shown a timeline of the 21st century. This is some years ago, with a special emphasis on extraterrestrials and their interaction with this planet and our interaction with them. Now, understand, extraterrestrials are there now. They're here now. There are other planets with civilizations on them, and there have been for millions and billions of years. What I'm talking about is the opening of global mass society to these realities. The reality already exists. What doesn't exist is a mass awareness on the part of global humanity of the reality. For whatever reason, we have been put in a total state of ignorance and amnesiac forgetfulness and kind of sealed off from the rest of the galaxy. I don't know why, but we have been for thousands of years. And what I was shown is that as this century progresses, that is going to change. Exactly how it's going to change and who's going to do it and what their motivation is, I can't speak to that. There are many players and actors, both on the part of extraterrestrials. There are myriad extraterrestrial civilizations and factions with many different motivations and agendas. Just as on this planet itself, there are many different power factions with different motivations and agendas. So however that power faction aspect of it works out, I don't know. But what I was shown is that generally between now and about 2020, 2025, for all I know, it could happen this year. But over the next 10, 15 years, 10 years, say, there'll be more and more of an awareness of life on other planets and other civilizations, such that it won't be viewed as strange anymore. It'll be more and more viewed as, oh yeah, everybody knows there are other planets and there's life on other planets, and hey, you know what? There's ET civilizations on other planets. That'll be the first step, and we're part of the way there already. I mean, there are more and more people with that kind of knowledge now, but it'll get to the point where it'll be, universal, where 90% or 95% or more of the average human being in, Botswana or Paraguay or wherever will say, oh yeah, I heard about that. That's true. That's true. I heard something about that last year that there are people on other planets. Yeah, weird, man, but yeah, evidently that's the case. That'll be the stage, okay?
Yeah.
So just about everyone will reach that point. And then beyond that, as we move deeper into the century, say by mid-century or before, um, there will actually be open contact with these civilizations, one or more, such that there would be something like an exchange of ambassadors or guests, or I don't have a precise word to describe what I'm trying to convey to you, but that there will be one or more of Earth humans going there, one or more of them coming here, but it'll be done openly.
Integration.
I'm pretty sure that's happening. Well, no, not on a mass societal basis. There'll be representatives, small numbers of representatives. It'll be more like diplomatic exchange or very limited cultural exchange or scientific exchange or anthropological exchange or whatever word you want to give it. But there won't be like space liners carrying 300,000 people from Earth to there and vice versa. I'm not talking about that. But it'll be to the point where people will say, "Oh yeah, I heard about that, and we sent a representative over there." Crazy, man. That's 300 light years from there. But yeah, we sent a representative there, and it may even be like on network television or the internet or whatever, and that'll happen very publicly and openly. I believe that that's happening secretly and has been for decades, but it'll be open to the public, and then by such a most everyone will be aware of it, and then and that'll have a tremendous effect culturally and socially, spiritually, and in every respect. And then later in the century, after mid-century, roughly the period 2060 to 2075, thereabouts, there will be something like commercial exchange, trade relations established. But understand, I don't think there'll be like freighters full of petroleum going to Alpha Centauri or or 600 million tons of gold ore and things like that. I believe the trade would involve things like art, probably art or
flora and fauna, maybe
genetic protoplasm, DNA, things like that, or certain isotopes on Earth, minerals, maybe mineral samples. Beautiful examples of gems and things like that are unique to Earth. Every planet is different, and so. But what would be important to another race, another species of life, another civilization on another arm of the Milky Way galaxy? I don't know. You see, they're alien. They're different. So
right.
I couldn't say, and vice versa. What of theirs would appeal to us and have great cachet or importance? So I think there'll be a tremendous leavening effect here. It'll cause tremendous ferment and growth in human society and human mentality, and so in general, the trajectory will be in that direction as the century unfolds. Now, for us to realize that, we have to survive as a species. And if we don't get nuclear technology, number one, under control, we are done for.
Right.
Because it will take us down. We can't handle Fukushima now. And what happens? Chernobyl was bad enough. Now we have Fukushima. What happens when we have Chernobyl, Fukushima, and another one, and another one, and another one? You see, if that keeps happening, we're done. And in fact, if we don't resolve Fukushima, we still may be done. So, in order for this reality to unfold, we humanity must have a global racial awakening, and we have to utterly, completely reject nuclear technology at the least, because we can't handle it.
Yeah, that is fascinating info, and I hope that we live to see that day. Can you tell what the source was for that timeline?
Me? My consciousness.
Oh, it came to you like it was revealed to you
In visionary form.
like a psychedelic
Interior.
type of.
No, not psychedelic, as in a direct visionary transmission of information.
Interesting.
In other words, my own consciousness, my hyperdimensional aspects of my own being, and I'm not presenting to you or pretending to you that I alone uniquely am able to do this, or I'm having telepathic visionary downloads of information. Lots of people are.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's a unique capacity of human beings, this integration of the DNA and the consciousness and the physical realm. We have these multidimensional, hyperdimensional aspects. Any individual can access this if he or she wants to. Most people do not want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been down that road before.